So here we are. Oops. And I am apparently in lack of some. Oh, there we are. Okay. My battery is running out. Okay, so we basically, I mean, machine ethics is a lovely area because it has many open questions, and there are many things to be done there, regardless of, I mean, for many different types of profiles. And so we realized that we are having discussion among ourselves all the time about particular issues while we were preparing the tutorial. So we just decided to put these open questions on slides. And you will see that for many of these open questions, the situation is that it is such an open question that we don't even are necessarily sure as to how to phrase it. So I start here with normative versus moral reasoning. So sometimes we are asked, what is the difference between machine ethics and with normative reasoning? So there is this long-standing tradition about implementing normative reasoning in machine agent systems. So is it the case that machine ethics is just normative reasoning? And so the situation here is, of course, not because, I mean, there are norms that are not ethics, like driving on the right hand of the street when you are in continental Europe is not about ethics. It's about it's about staying alive and the law, but it's not an ethical norm. But apart from that, the question then is, does it make a difference when you program a machine based on theory of obligation, or that you program the machine based on theory of value? Is there a difference in machine ethics whether you're doing theory of obligation or theory of value? And if you see with it's very easy to actually, in my morally philosophically untrained mind, to transform values into obligations. This is in a way what Ross does. He takes a value that is, I don't know, do no harm, and then makes an obligation to it and says you ought to not do harm. But what I'm asking, I guess, is, does it make a difference for whether we make a machine that is to be a good machine, for whatever the definition of that good is that we agree on, maybe by social choice, or should we just program the machine like, okay, these are the rules, you should follow this, and that? Does it actually end up with having different behavior?
So I get uncomfortable by this kind of what a machine should be. So I'm not. So Joanna Bryson has written several things in which she's, very clear that she believes that a machine can never be a moral agent, this kind of full ethical agency, that we should not try and make machines that are moral agents, because the agency and responsibility should always lie with us, the people who have programmed the machine or programmed it to learn or whatever. I'm not trying to necessarily go that far, because I don't want to exclude the possibility at some point we end up with a machine that is a moral agent, and if it is genuinely a moral agent, then we have, I think, obligations for how we should treat it. But I think it's certainly true that we've got nothing at the moment that is approaching moral agency. So we should be very clear that at the moment moral agency resides in us. And then I get worried about this, what a machine should be, because I feel that strays into the machine has values, or the machine exhibits values of itself rather than them somehow coming back to us as people. And I know that's not quite what Maria was driving at, but I don't like this framing of the question. I don't like this, what should the machine be? I think I'd rather have something about, are we talking just about, as Maria says, what are the obligations, what should it do or should it not do, rather than saying, well, should we take a step back and talk about what virtues its actions exhibit, but be clear that those virtues are residing in us in some sense. We've given it the ordering, or we've told it what the priorities are or something.
And I mean, of course, very clearly, there is apparently a very strict definition of what a moral agent is in moral philosophy, or at least there is this common understanding of what a moral agent is. And there is a double think, because when we in computer science talk about a moral agent, we're talking about an agent in the sense of computer science, right? So that is something that acts, whatever that is. And then the ability of agency is not really a binary value. It's not really has agency, doesn't have agency, but it's kind of like a, you know, a value between zero, a real number between 0 and 1, whereas 0 is a stone and 1 a toaster. No, toaster is probably higher than 0. 0 is a stone and is a human, right? And
So Maria, I'm losing you. I don't know if other people are.
Yes, I cannot hear properly either.
While Maria reappears, I'm going to kind of take a slight diversion here. I think also this question about normative reasoning versus moral reasoning also depends a bit on what kind of ethical theory you're talking about. I mean, they look very similar if you're using one of these deontic logic things, but everything's encoded up in terms of, you know, permissions and obligations and, you know, prohibitions, because there's a long history of doing normative. You know, you're obliged to be polite. You're obliged to drive on the right. So these all look very similar in the way you're encoding them up. And in that case, ethical reasoning looks like, you know, at the very least, a special case of normative reasoning. Whereas if instead you are in something like utilitarianism, particularly if you've got one of these systems where you view everything as ethical, well, you know, the you should be polite somehow translates itself into a utility along with everything else. And so you're kind of at a, okay, no, maybe I'm not, I just feel you're expressing things. Oh, she's back.
Okay, sorry, my internet just dropped. I think maybe it's better if you share the slides and I will switch off the camera because something is happening with the connection.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to make sure, because according to my schedule, the official starting time was like starting from within 10 minutes at 8:20 p.m.
Okay.
So like, I'm not sure if we have like officially started the tutorial.
So we're the previous tutorial. We started 2 hours ago, 3 hours ago.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry.
Oh,
Okay.
Okay, so then
please go on. Please go on.
So you are supposed to stop in 5 minutes, not 10 minutes then.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay, I got it.
I
got it. Okay.
Also,
okay,
there is
sorry.
a question, it seems, from the chat.
Oh, okay.
So maybe we could enter that in the remaining minutes.
Can agents learn ethical rules? Well, there's a kind of trivial answer there, which is yes. In that's what's happening in the Gen X.
If you can specify them, yes.
I mean, there's a big question begging what do you mean here by an ethical rule? But the Gen X system has definitely learned things that look like ethical rules. That you know they are things like if the patient's life is in danger, then it is more important to take whatever action is needed to preserve their life than it is to respect their privacy. And that's the kind of thing that Gen X has learned. So there's definitely, you know, systems can learn ethical rules. I mean, there's a whole load of stuff, you know, which Maria covered in the her talk about social choice, about, you know, what does it learn and from whom does it learn? And so there are a lot of questions there. And certainly, I don't think we've got systems that could learn generalized ethical reasoning across all situations.
But I mean, there is a work that Bertram Malle does, which I will include it in the slides. And if I don't, somebody keep me accountable. His group is working on a system that basically learns norms of behavior in a hospital environment from the staff. And they have this kind of a very complex VR situation in which they are doing this. So, of course, in addition to the reinforcement learning approaches that Luis covered, so the ABEL and that are from Stuart Armstrong, I believe originally, who I think is on the chat, if that's the same Stuart Armstrong.
Yes, I think medical ethics is an interesting domain in that a lot of thought has gone into, in quite a sophisticated way, what is ethical in that domain. So it's a good place to start looking for how you might go from, captured human knowledge about what's ethical, or observation from behavior of professionals about what is ethical, to actually ethical behavior. And obviously it's much more hard in a generalized setting because lots of people aren't really explicitly thinking about ethics when they reason. And if something turns out to be unethical, it's often something that they realize after the fact and then they feel bad about it or whatever. And I guess the other thing is also what you mean by a rule. So lots of the systems we've looked at, they have this kind of explicit symbolic AI approach. So you imagine learning things which you then can translate into these kind of very explicit things which you can then reason about in some way. But obviously we have lots of machine learning things where everything's captured in a deep neural net. So is it rules that it's learning or just some kind of mapping from features of its input data to action selection? Or even, we had one about classification letters, to a classification, what's the ethical way to classify a person? And then it's much harder to say, is that really a rule it's learning or some kind of mapping? And I'm kind of, yes. So I think the trivial answer is yes, it's possible for machines to learn ethical rules. I think that begs a number of other questions. So I can't actually see the chat when I'm sharing the screen. So Maria, you'll have to check in the chat soon.
Yeah, I monitor the chat. I man the chat.
Okay.
But you have the next question anyway on your slide.
Okay. I think we've got time for one more question.
Yeah.
We've got 1 minute.
Oh no, that's not the one.
It's not the one.
You have to go to the next one, yes. And I think, yeah, this one.
Ethical action. Yes, I touched on that briefly. That is, we've always looked at, mostly, what actions should the machine do? But obviously we use machines to do, not just to perform actions in the world. And in particular, there's lots of interest in AI and ethics as a field more generally, in classifying systems. And so is there such a thing as an ethical classification? And can the sort of techniques we've been used in machine ethics also be applied to this question of what's an ethical classification? And of course, that immediately gets us into the kind of questions around algorithmic bias. And something I think that quite interesting, that in the field of AI and ethics as a whole, obviously algorithmic bias is a massive topic, but it's one that machine ethics as a subfield, or the kind of machine ethics we've been talking about, seems to have had very little to say about that. And so I think that's interesting. I'm not quite sure what the question is here, beyond the, surely these two subfields should be talking to each other more, and surely we should be, there should be more cross-fertilization between both the problem of algorithmic bias and what machine ethics techniques might be able to bring to the table there, but also when we're looking at our machine ethics systems, even if it's a theorem-proving system, we should be thinking about bias, because we're encoding these rules. Some of them are obviously, women and children first is a kind of long-standing ethical rule, but there is clearly some sort of value judgment about worths of different lives in there, which gets you into the kind of the algorithmic bias area. So this is kind of more just, I think there should be more interaction between these two fields.
Yeah, and also there is here, I would say, particularly when you work with these deduction and abduction systems, there is a lot of room for encoding certain common sense, which seems innocuous, but only because you are in a particular environment. So for instance, you may want to encode an ordering of houses on the street, or encode an ordering of pages in a book. And you are always going to use, left to right if you're in a country that is left to right, right? But that means that you are kind of enforcing this left to right to whoever uses the system. And you create bias for this particular, you make the system biased. It works better for this particular system of countries or users that count from left to right, and worse for people who count from right to left, right? So I believe that there is some kind of like an interaction here, perhaps with requirement engineering. How do you actually, because machine learning bias is pretty much this statistical measure, and you are measuring parity between the positive outcomes for a protected group and positive outcomes for a non-protected group, and you want to make sure that there are as many positive outcomes for the results classifications yeses on your requirements for for people in the protected group as there are proportionally for people in non-protected group. So it kind of, there is this very clean math there. Does it actually mean bias, fairness? Very long discussion, but there is the math. Whereas when you're doing this, rule-based system, then the math doesn't translate. Somebody is not muted, but should be muted.
I think we have to stop anyway, because otherwise the next week we won't be able to set up. So thank you all for attending. If you have any questions, please email us, and have a fun time at ICHCAI.
Yeah, same as what Luis said. Thanks for the opportunity and thanks for the help from the organizers as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time and beautiful presentation. Thank you.